All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to our latest explainer, where we're cutting through the noise to look at the real world impacts of the administration's actions from July 10th through the 16th. Our focus today: separating the political messaging from the tangible effects these policies actually have on working class Americans. We're tracking the facts and following the incentives to see exactly who benefits and who really absorbs the risk. So, here is our roadmap for today: 1. The governing pattern; 2. Immigration and labor; 3. Public health and extraction; 4. Global conflicts; 5. Executive power; and 6. The working class impact.
Kicking things off with Section 1, the week's governing pattern, protecting workers versus shifting risks. Looking at the actions from this week, a really clear pattern emerges. The administration's stated goals: they consistently highlight protecting jobs, taxpayers, and national security. Sounds great, right? But when you trace the actual real-world effects, a totally different picture takes shape. Basically, actions that are framed as a win for ordinary Americans are often granting immediate relief to extractive industries or the executive branch itself. And what about the long-term hidden risks, like health hazards or economic burdens? Well, those are getting transferred directly onto the public.
Moving right along to Section 2, immigration and labor dignity, temporary fixes, and chilling effects.
Okay, on July 10th, Homeland Security announced they were extending work permits for hundreds of thousands of temporary protected status recipients. On paper, that sounds like some solid relief, but the actual timeline is wild. Permits for workers from places like Syria and Yemen were extended for literally just 1 week. Haitian permits only got until July 24th. So sure, industries didn't lose their legally authorized workforce overnight, but this is really just kicking the can down the road. It totally denies these workers the long-term labor dignity they need to, actually plan their lives or even secure housing. Then, later in the week on July 16th, the administration announced they were reviving the public charge immigration rule, set to hit on September 18th. Basically, this rule allows immigration officers to deny green cards if they think an applicant might become dependent on public assistance. But here is the catch. Rather than just giving a straightforward list of disqualifying programs, officers are instructed to make individualized judgments based on the totality of circumstances. In the real world, that ambiguity functions as a de facto wealth test for legal immigration. Now, what's absolutely crucial to understand here is the massive second-order effect. Because the rule is so unbelievably broad, it creates this huge chilling effect. We're seeing reports that mixed-status families are actually avoiding using Medicaid or food assistance purely out of fear. And that's even when their U.S. citizen kids legally qualify for it. When families pull back from preventative care like that, what happens? We see a spike in uncompensated ER visits and workplace absenteeism. So the federal government might save a few bucks up front, but those massive costs, they just get shifted directly onto local schools, local hospitals, and municipal governments. It's like a giant game of financial hot potato. All right, on to Section 3, public health and extraction. Who gets the relief and who gets the risk? Let's look at July 13th. The administration granted certain chemical plants a 2-year exemption from parts of the EPA's hazardous organic national emission standards. The official argument was that rapid compliance could force shutdowns. And okay, maybe that preserves some short-term industrial jobs, but the economic reality? It's a massive transfer of costs. The capital savings for these chemical companies translate directly into health risks for the local residents who are now forced to absorb higher potential rates of respiratory illnesses. Calling this regulatory relief kind of masks who is actually bearing the heavy burden of that toxic exposure. And on that exact same day, July 13th, the administration reduced the Bears Ears National Monument by a staggering 91%. 91%. The proclamation slashed the protected area from roughly 1.36 million acres down to just over 121,000. And a parallel proclamation took a huge chunk out of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, too. The administration explicitly stated that the potential for uranium, copper, and other mineral development was a higher priority use for this newly excluded land. So, the crucial point we really need to grasp here is the trade-off. The immediate beneficiaries are obvious. Uranium and copper mining firms get fresh access to public lands. But the cost? Opening these lands up threatens long-standing local tourism economies, it risks permanent damage to vital tribal cultural sites, and at the end of the day, it leaves taxpayers completely on the hook for the future environmental cleanup. It is a literal trade-off of temporary extraction jobs against irreversible damage to the landscape. That brings us to Section 4, Global Conflicts and Costs. Economic shocks and war powers. When you look at the timeline, we saw some seriously abrupt shifts in foreign policy this week that directly threatened global supply chains. On July 13th, the president proposed a 20% fee on cargo moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if that had actually happened, freight and energy costs would have just skyrocketed for ordinary households. Literally the next day, July 14th, the proposal was abruptly abandoned after talks with Gulf governments. So yeah, that reversal prevented some immediate financial pain, but it definitely showcased a really erratic, unstable approach to one of the world's most crucial shipping corridors.
Simultaneously, the administration was pulling some complex legal maneuvers regarding military action in Iran. It basically went like this. Step 1, the administration claimed that an earlier round of hostilities had officially terminated. Step 2, they formally notified Congress that renewed hostilities began on July 7th. Step 3, they used this to claim a brand new 60-day window under the War Powers Resolution to conduct military operations entirely without congressional authorization. By treating the fighting as separate, bite-sized episodes rather than one ongoing conflict, legal analysts argue the administration is effectively sidestepping Congress. And who pays the price? Working-class military families get put at prolonged risk of combat, while federal spending and fuel prices are driven way up.
Section 5. Executive Power and Legality, Testing Constitutional Boundaries. All of these actions, they are setting the stage for massive legal battles over executive overreach. Take the Antiquities Act. The administration claims that the power to designate monuments naturally includes the power to drastically shrink them. But tribal and conservation organizations, they're arguing that only Congress actually possesses that authority to revoke. And on that war powers issue we just talked about, critics are arguing that treating a prolonged conflict with Iran as a series of fresh 60-day periods severely stresses the constitutional separation of powers, effectively bypassing the need for legislative approval completely.
Domestically, the tensions were just as high. Let's move to July 16th. In a primetime national address, the president repeated claims about the 2020 election without providing any new evidence. And when ABC and NBC declined to carry that address live, the president stated they should lose their broadcast licenses. Now, it is important to note here that the FCC licenses individual local stations, not national networks. But First Amendment advocates are quick to point out that threatening to punish an outlet for an editorial decision is pretty much textbook viewpoint-based retaliation.
And finally, Section 6, the working class impact, evaluating the real balance sheet.
When you pull all of these threads together, the analysis shows that the material balance sheet for the working class this week was heavily negative. The benefits were overwhelmingly concentrated and immediate for very specific industries, while the heavy costs were dispersed and delayed for the public. Chemical manufacturers get to avoid compliance costs, but local communities face the pollution. Mining firms get access to public land, but taxpayers inherit the eventual cleanup liabilities. And unchecked executive military action? That just leaves working-class enlisted families to bear the physical and fiscal costs.
This all brings us to a massive core lesson from the week. The administration has frequently equated corporate production benefits with worker welfare. And sure, while those interests can occasionally overlap, they definitely aren't identical. Handing public lands to mining companies or allowing chemical plants to bypass safety standards, those are clear-cut corporate wins. But a policy is not inherently pro-worker merely because an employer benefits from it, especially when the resulting health and economic risks are pushed right back onto the laborers themselves.
Ultimately, true public policy requires bearing the costs of health and security, not just hiding them off the books. As we wait for the inevitable legal injunctions and First Amendment challenges to roll in, the ultimate test of any administration's actions is simple. We have to look past the stated intent and track exactly who walks away with the profits and who is left holding the hidden costs.